This is the
You know,
Unrationed podcast.
oh, I'm sorry as I step on you immediately. Are you hearing that in the background?
No, I
Oh,
was just
nice.
trying
Okay.
to listen to what Evan was saying, introducing.
Starting the podcast.
Yeah,
Evan,
there's a.
start the podcast.
This is the Unrationed podcast. My name is Evan,
I'm Josh.
And I am Tony.
and let's kick it off with our wild moments this week, fellas. Josh, what's your wild moment? Oh, Tony. Tony is ready. He had the finger waving. Tony, what's your wild moment, man?
A couple mornings ago, I walk into the co-working space, and Kate, the delightful woman who owns uh, Muskoka Collective, is there sitting at the desk, and she looks frazzled. I ask her, "What's up? How you doing?" And she describes her morning, how she got there late and kind of got a late start on things because like she and her family, they live on some acreage kind of just outside town of Huntsville, and dogs went out, and then the dogs come back all bloody. And so she goes out back to see what it was, and like wolves had gotten to a deer, like on their property, in like, yeah, like in their yard, and way that's pretty wild. So she was, it's wild living in a place where there are wolves still. Like that feels very wild to me, that um there are indeed wolves in my backyard. Um and then also that, like, you're going to your job as the owner of like a hipster co-working space, but first you need to drag a deer carcass out into a space where the dogs aren't going to get at it more. um
Knowing that
very,
wolves are too far away from you at that point.
yeah. Well, the wolves typically don't bother people in a way that's interesting, but yeah, but I mean, clear, they had wolves in their backyard, like in their actual backyard. When I say my backyard, like we've got 15 acres of forest, and so they're like, we know that there are moose back there, and that like wolves or like black bears might come through, but we've never seen any of those. We just, like, they're not interested in seeing us, so they don't come close.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, it is.
All right, before we get on to other wild moments, I feel like I have to introduce this thing that I learned the other day. So I went on this tangent about wolves, and specifically in Yellowstone. So they reintroduced them in, like, I don't know, late 1980s or something like that, back into Yellowstone. And there's this phenomenon called the trophic cascade. And basically, what have you, either of you heard of this? Oh
No.
man, it's amazing. So anyways, they, like, hunters and everything, killed all the wolves in that general area. And I think this was like 1920s, 1940s. And anyways, when they reintroduced the wolves, they were monitoring all these changes that were going on across the board. So you introduce something at the top of the food chain, and these reintroduce these thing at the top of the food chain. And so there was all this erosion basically near the water streams or the rivers. And there was like beat down of a bunch of different plant life, different populations of animals were all jacked up. Wildflowers that hadn't been there for 60, 70 years started to come back. But basically, introducing the wolf did a series of things. One, the wolf started to hunt the elk and killing off more elk. Well, those elk, to avoid getting eaten and like protecting themselves, started going higher up in the mountains. And so when they would come down and just like hang out by the banks of these rivers, they were beating down all the plant life, causing more erosion and everything. And so they see like all these crazy things start to happen, and that, like, the rivers start to become healthier, new plants start to emerge, birds start to show up, bear population increases because they're like eating off the deer or the elk carcasses. So it's like this amazing ripple effect just by introducing one thing that I do think is germane to some of the stuff that we talked about with wilds in the woods. Like reintroducing something into the wild has healthier effects or health effects. But sorry, I get super geeked out about it, and it's really neat. Trophic Cascade, Yellowstone, it will blow your mind, all the different impacts that it had by reintroducing one species.
That's very cool.
It's almost as if healthy men are introduced to society, it has a ripple effect on everything.
Comes full circle.
Bam.
That's-
We should end right there.
Thank you for listening to the Unrationed podcast. Oh,
That is a really awesome metaphor, analogy for what we're trying to do, man. That's awesome.
We should put that in the show notes because I feel like every person needs to watch this clip that I've watched multiple times.
Yeah, totally. Okay, Josh, was that your wild moment? It's totally fine if that's your wild moment, but do you
I
have
mean,
any-
it totally can be. I don't feel like I really had that many wild moments this past week, other than like it's so easy not to get outside. Like I feel like in my stage of life, that was like my wild moment, and that I can be just like a caged animal very, very easily by not making the decision, the intentional decision to like go outside. So it's been a busy work week, a lot of family stuff. And so, but I can like feel it building up inside of me. And so I think just that recognition of, what I need to, to feed my soul is very, very present in me right now.
Yeah,
what do you got, Chastain?
I'm gonna be not a wild moment, but you just mentioned that time outside. I've been doing the cold plunge still every morning,
Nice.
10 minutes. And this morning, and it's outside. So I get my 10 minutes outside first thing in the morning right now because of the cold plunge. It's like the cold plunge itself has this ripple effect, like causes me to sit for 10 minutes and meditate and be outside and submerge my body in cold water before I do anything else for the day. And like it's stacking all of these things that we've talked about in a way that I was not expecting, that I've really enjoyed. And it was raining on me this morning even. So it was like the first time that it was raining on me outside. And there's something wild about the rain, like just how our ecosystem works. I don't know. I don't want to get too weird into it, but it's a sustaining, life-giving force that just like comes down from the sky. And it's pretty wild that this is how everything works. And we just accept it as if it's no big deal. And unless it either stops raining and then it's like, oh my gosh, we need rain, we need water. Where did this go? Why is this happening? Or if it rains too much and it's like, it destroys everything. So there's like this balance of life-giving that we take for granted most times. And sitting in the rain was a cool experience. Sitting in the rain, shivering, sitting in cold water was a cool experience this morning. I guess that'll be my wild moment. But yeah. I was going to talk about my run from last Saturday. That did it though. We'll get into that.
Nice. It's good stuff. Yeah, but let's get into the run and
All right.
how we're coming along with Unrationed Ring the Springs. We had our first group call Sunday night with Kyle and Mike and Pat. That was most excellent. And how's training going, dudes? As we are now, how far we're recording this on Thursday, the 27th of April, which means that 2 days from now is 8 weeks from the race. I think, yeah, 2 weeks.
Something like that.
I think it's 8 weeks from go time.
Baby.
So yeah, how we doing?
I did a
No,
15-miler on Saturday.
7 weeks. 7 weeks. I'm sorry. Seven. Yep. Josh, you need to practice more.
I did a
Sorry.
15-miler on Saturday, and it was 15. I was planning on doing 20, but I had to stop I told myself I would stop anytime I felt pain, just to not get injured. It's like today's not the day to push past pain in training. Let that be like on race day or depending on what type of pain, feel it out. So I was going for 20, and at mile 15, like right after it, I had to poop so bad. And that it was like one of those where I'm like, I'm gonna run to the bathroom and hope that I make it. And it felt really good. No pain for 15 miles. First time I ran 15 with no pain like that. And then the next day had very minimal soreness. Like it was just another normal day, which I've not had that experience yet on a long run. So it felt really encouraging. Like I'm somewhat on track to run 32.
Badass.
Yeah, dude. That's great.
I think that
Um,
that approach of the paying attention to pain is really important, and that's actually why I hired a coach in preparing for this 100K. Was to try to figure out how to ramp up my mileage without getting myself hurt. Um, and I'll touch on that a little bit more. But Josh, you were about to give us an update.
um, yeah. So I was doing a check-in with my brothers and dad the other day, and there was something about just running that has really stood out in me, and that, well, a couple things. Training has been going mediocre the last week and a half. So I feel like some life events are impacting that, where my wife just signed with Burn Boot Camp as a franchise partner to open that up in Colorado Springs, which is super, super exciting. It continues the trajectory of us focusing on health in all aspects of our life. But I think it's just been intense, right? We're trying to move financing along. We're trying to pick a spot, trying to support her. And so in addition to having like work myself be busy, and I was sharing with the guys on Sunday night, and that like my wife and I were having a conversation Saturday, and I'm like, I just don't know where the time's going to come from and preserve the things that are the most important in my life. Like running is very, very important, but I can say with 100% certainty it is not the most important thing. And so is there's this like really real, not epiphany, but just realization that the only truth that I have is that I'm going to suffer a ton going through this. And so now what I can do is prepare myself as well as I can while preserving the things that I hold dear in my heart and just enjoy the suffering. And so I think just like that sinking in my head, where now I'm in this situation, the flip side of it, where I've given myself some grace. I've given myself a little bit of a break over the last week. Like, okay, I got to get this done for Laura. I got to get this done for me. And I'll bail on the rut tonight. Right. You can get into such bad habits so quickly. Like it's amazing like what a week will do in terms of your mentality. I'm like, oh boy, I gotta buckle down. Like, so today I just need to bang something out during the day, whether it's 2 miles or 6 miles. I just need to get it done. Otherwise I feel like I'll get into just a really bad habit of not putting one foot in front of the other as it relates to my training. And I'll, make an excuse that it's because I have other things that I need to get done, and so anyways, I'm in a weird mental state. I think right now, not necessarily a weird mental state, but I can feel bad habits trying to creep in that I need to squash sooner rather than later.
Hmm. So on that week where you're taking it easier, or you've just got so much else going on, what'd your mileage look like?
Oh, it was like 15 miles. Like the
Oh
previous
shit.
weeks were like upwards of 45. So it's like, oh yeah, just like taking it in the shorts, man. But this week I'll probably get like in the 30s this week. I'm doing a Tough Mudder with my nephews. I'm going into Missouri tonight actually. And so I'll get miles today, I'll get miles tomorrow, and I'll do a long run in Rockwood Reservation in Missouri on Sunday morning. So I should get, mid 30s or up.
What are you expecting will be your like top training week in terms of time or mileage?
I'll probably top out at like upper 50s.
Yeah.
I don't see the margin in the week to do more than that. Um, so yeah, I
And
just
what do
told
you
Laura I was gonna cap like my midweek runs, like 75 minutes is gonna be my max. I'm not gonna do 90 minutes anymore or 2 hours during the week and just get my mind right for the race.
what do you expect your longest run to be?
It'll probably be like 35.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I was looking over my Strava over the last month. Like getting into Strava, it's been nice you actually using it. I had never really gotten into it before. Um, but I had taken, I had had the foot thing where 2 weeks ago I only put in like 15 miles. Um, and yeah, to your point about injury prevention, Evan, they historically, I don't have a great sense of like diagnosing and then adjusting based on that. So like here it was really was interesting for me to feel this pain, to have this pain on the tops of both my feet. I don't think it's stress fractures. I think it's this other thing, tendonitis or something else, right? It's not that I'm broken.
Is it
Like
still
talk,
there?
it has improved. Like things have improved. Like the taking that time off, and then Zach, coach he was saying, all right, well, like keep letting me know how things are going, how it's feeling, and we're gonna ease off the speed work. So he had me like still putting in time, but not worrying about like getting up into like the lactate threshold and like the higher levels of training. But so like last week I still put in 37 miles, and then this week I'm on track to break 40 again, whereas like my top week so far has been 42, and I think it looks like this week is going to end up being 42 at like pretty light intensity, and then next week's going to be even more. But but it's been interesting to see how um being coachable has worked, that I've been able to continue with the mileage, and I didn't take like 3 weeks
Mhm.
off, doing like 10 or 15 miles and like waiting for that to totally go away, that I was able to like have that still happening
Yeah.
and adjust what I was doing in a way that I'm still getting the miles in while that situation has also improved. So
Yeah.
that's been an interesting lesson for me that like I don't think I would have figured that out on my own at all.
Yeah.
I hope that's right, that I'm actually better and my feet aren't just broken. You'd think I would know if my feet are broken.
You want to
Yeah.
say who your coach is?
What's that?
Who's your coach?
Zach Bitter. So he's like an ultra runner who he's like held a couple world records for like 100-mile stuff, and his wife Nicole
What is
is
a
just
world record for 100-mile stuff? Sorry, Nicole, to cut you
uh
off. Right. Like
I
what
did like
what type of a time needs to be how fast are you running to have a record in 100 miles? It sounds nuts.
I think it was like sub 7-minute miles for 100 miles. Like he did it
What?
on a track.
What?
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
And I think he also had a world record for like 24 hours.
Jeez.
But yeah,
Do
it's yeah.
Amazing.
you think he would come on this podcast at some point?
Zach, absolutely not. No, actually, he's far too. He has a podcast, The Human Outliers. I think it's called Human
That's a
Outliers or
great
whatever.
name. Man,
Um, but yeah, it's a good podcast, and yeah, like his wife Nicole is she's like toward the top of the game. in ultra running where she's like competing for golden tickets at
Jeez.
races like Javelina and some like other big races for like I think she's gotten a golden ticket for Western States 2 or 3 times in the last few years. So yeah,
Dang.
really impressive folks.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah.
Maybe now's a good time to transition into a follow-up from our last episode where Christy was with us. We went through our Compass playbook. Does that sound like an okay spot to do this?
Sounds like an excellent spot to do this.
Tony, you texted. I'm just gonna like read. Oh man, whenever I opened it back up, it went away. Hang on. Tony, you said, pondering since our recording last week, a couple of thoughts. One, we didn't get to the why, at least not for me. Why do I want to pursue this? And then you said, you kind of gave a reason. I'll let you give your reason there. And then you said, related to that, I ultimately do this work for myself because I need the support and accountability to get better. When somebody joins, it's not so that I can make you better. It's so that we can make each other better. We focus on growth and connection as a response to 2 problems we face as men today. Our worlds are getting more comfortable, convenient, and soft, and we're more isolated.
It's well said, Tony.
Yeah, very well said. Those 2 problems are, it's funny to think of them as I think sometimes comfortability, convenience, and softness, I wouldn't put them in the category of always a problem, but whenever they are the compass, if you will, like if comfortability, convenience, I'm going to leave softness out. Comfortability and convenience are, what do you mean by softness? What do you mean by being soft?
What comes to mind is our hands, like having nice, soft hand rather than the calloused hands of somebody who's been doing a lot of hard work.
Metaphorically or literally?
Literally.
What is I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, it's something Bly gets into in the first chapter of Iron John. Is like that, and he wrote that back in the 90s, but saying that the rise in the 60s and the 70s of the soft man, he describes that phenomenon as men who mean well, and they're thoughtful, they're sensitive, they don't want to hurt anybody, they're trying to be positive influences. But as Josh was saying with trophic cascade, is that what it was?
Yeah.
Like there are drop down consequences to how there's a ripple effect, and one that's caused.
What are those ripples? And we're somewhat getting off target here, but I this is helpful language, I think, for talking about what are the ripple effects of men being soft in our society, not having calluses on their hand.
It drives me nuts, actually, like when Laura laughs at me, because about once every like month or something, I'm like, I got these mamby-pamby hands or whatever. Like, my Gramps, he works on a ranch. He's 86 years old. He's slowing down, obviously, now. My grandpa for him, like tradesman, hands just like bears,
Yeah.
And it always, and my grandmother, she, we're out at the ranch. She's got amazing hands too, just like tough hands. And so I like, typing on the keyboard all day, sitting in a chair. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, right. This is the profession that I chose and I love my job. But you think about it, even just from like touching something hot, right? I pick up a hot coffee mug, or, I'm taking a plate to my family after I've served a dinner. It's like a hot plate and you kind of like, it's tender and stuff. It it changes the way that we can interact with difficult situations because we don't have a built up tolerance or threshold for difficult things, such as really difficult manual labor. And this is why we do what we do in terms of these big big runs. It's like, how do we embrace pain a little bit more so that we can have an appropriate relationship with it, so that we can navigate it in our everyday life? Because it's kind of like a cold exposure, right? You're introducing an element of what do they call it, like strain and trauma to your body, but at very low doses. And so if we don't have any exposure to those low dosages, we can't navigate it effectively. So it manifests itself in every conversation is threatening, and every conversation is polarizing, and we don't know how to interact with people the way that we used to. But that's just my opinion, I guess.
That's
It seems
brilliantly
like,
put.
yeah,
Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead, Evan.
It seems like tough hands could be a value. If we're like, I'm not trying to bring back up the exercise, but I love that value
That's pretty
based on
good.
what we're talking about. And it's distinct too. Like it's not a value that everybody else is going to have. Like tough hands being a value of Wilds in the Woods, it's solid.
I actually had that
Oh,
thought
baby.
since we had the call that toughness needed to be in there, that was part of what we were doing. So yeah, tough hands is that's spot on. And as you were talking, Josh, I was thinking about cold exposure and like why I haven't sitting in a cold water for 10 minutes a morning, and my own experience up here with running, and how before last year when I was running outside over the winter, um, like I would have said that I'm okay running outside down to like 26 degrees, like that could be all right. And now I know that I'm good down to like 0. Like I can go run 5 miles at 0 degrees and I'll be all right. Once it gets down to like -5, that's when your eyeballs start freezing and it causes issues. But it's like by virtue of coming up here and putting myself in those positions, like just the threshold for discomfort, the threshold for pain, it moves in ways that are really important. And so, and Josh, when you're describing, yeah, like what we do, like we aren't meant to be, we're not designed to be sitting all day typing on a keyboard, right? It's just such a recent development that there are consequences, right? There are a lot of consequences to being more sedentary and less active and less engaged with the physical world. And so when we're with what we're doing here, it's like, how do we build in rhythms? Yeah, and thinking about that on the macro, which is like the big shots we're taking, right? And then also on the micro, like the day to day, like what am I going to do today to just not be that guy who's getting more comfortable, continuing on that trajectory unabated or unchallenged. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
It was good, man.
It's funny, like I'm all in favor of like a 4-day work week and working less. But the thing that stands out in my mind is, so my mother-in-law is one of 10. Her family grew up on a farm, and she just like shares some of these stories in terms of like their way of life in that time period, and just like tough people, man. And so you think about like, right, we're all training. We're talking about training to do something hard. And that way of life just trained you, I feel like, better for life. Like things are hard, weather changes, food comes from the land. And I know we're getting kind of like, hippy dippy and back in the day, but it's like, this is like, it doesn't have to be like rocket science. It's just like there's an element that we have made decisions to take us down a trajectory, which is fine. There's amazing convenience. And I think it goes back to the comfort question. There's great elements of comfort that come from today. But if we don't process what we're giving up, I think we run the risk of just living that unexamined life and saying like, actually we're kind of going down a funky trajectory and we need to do something about it.
Why do you say we're sounding hippy dippy?
Well, I don't know. Like, I'm just thinking about like the people in my life that would hear me say these things and be like, "You're such a freaking hippie." And so maybe I'm harnessing like just different feedback that I've gotten at different times. It's like, just call it what it is from different people's perspectives. But I think it's
Yeah, that
real.
brings to mind the David Foster Wallace "This Is Water" commencement address, where
So
yeah,
good.
right, yeah, that's like in our well, he uses the joke about there are two young fish swimming along, and then the older fish comes by. He says, "How's the water this morning, boys?" And one of the little fish, and after they pass, looks and says, "What's water?" And that's us, right? Like in this world that is, I mean, it is absolutely incredible, the lives we're leading. It's nothing short of amazing. Um, but it is, so it's so easy to forget how recent it is. That,
Yeah.
like, if you showed our world to somebody even 100 years ago or 200 years ago,
Just ask the old people alive today. They'll tell you.
Mhm.
Like you
yeah,
don't need to go back that far.
yeah,
Like the
it's
older generation will just blatantly say this generation is soft. Like use the words we're talking about. And they probably are talking about it in a little bit of a different way, but there's something to that. They grew up experiencing life very differently than we have
Yeah.
in Silver Art.
Yeah.
I've got something, Josh. Do you have something though before I jump
Well,
to
I'm like harnessing my inner Evan, just like thinking about honoring old and new. Like I'm thinking about just these different journeys and like we can't get to where we're going without knowing where people before us have come. But there's something interesting in this like age of technology or something in that we're moving forward at a rapid rate, yet we don't have the practices to honor the old and take and glean from the old so that we can more healthily navigate the modern advancements or something. I don't know how to say it eloquently, but I'm trying to harness my inner Evan. So
yeah.
maybe can you wrap it up for me?
The word that I would use for that is tradition. It's like I think it's important to in some way honor and even practice traditions of old as we progress. To like be conservative and progressive simultaneously. Like conserve the things that hold meaning and move forward still in a way, and not as politically, but I think those words that are politically charged right now they haven't always been as politically charged. There's value in conserving. There's value in holding on to things that uh, have been passed down from generation to generation, and there's value in change and doing things differently. So that's what maybe tradition was the word that came to mind as you were saying that, Josh. It's like what traditions can we hold on to? Rites of passage being the one that's like relevant here. Is like that tradition seems to have had a big impact on the men who experienced the rite of passage, and the lack of a rite of passage for men seems to contribute to the problems we're discussing in these podcasts.
the rite of passage is one thing. Another thing that's coming to mind, it that I think we're speaking to directly in what we're doing here is that problem of isolation, right? That, and I don't know if tradition is the right word to describe kind of how things have changed, but there's this continual progress away from community, right? Where it's like we're building a community from scratch, right? From nothing, that uh, exists largely in digital virtual space. Because frankly, like I'm motivated personally to do this because I don't have it, like up here. And part of that is like, why don't I have it? Part of it's my choice, right? That I haven't I haven't plugged into my community up here since moving up here 2 years ago. But also like the internet gives us the ability to like choose
Yeah.
who we're building community with and how. But again, it's a different thing, right? So it's like trying to conserve that, what the Vonnegut line, like every argument between couples boils down to you're not enough people, right? What do we do about that problem? And like this is certainly an attempt to try to solve that for myself. But yeah.
I mean, I imagine a rite of passage, or like the pieces of rite of passage. One is going out and being alone. And I think there's value in actually going out and being isolated, and then coming back. So like you understand whenever you go through something like that, how much of how like being isolated is hell, and it's difficult, and you go to a weird place. Like I think that's why rites of passages included young men going out into the wilderness alone and coming back to the community. It's like you don't realize the value of community until you've gone and experienced true isolation. But what's happened is we are becoming isolated within our communities. We're not going out and experiencing the real thing and then coming back. And it seems like the going out and coming back piece speaks to that, which would be the traditions that actually invite us to the wilderness. They're not places that are empty and devoid of all humans, but like we're invited to those places so that we learn something and then bring that something back to the community.
Yeah. I think it's interesting like how all these things like come full circle. But I was talking to this guy he's a leadership coach. I'm working out of this co-working space with him. He and another dude are partnering together. His name's Alan Briggs, just great dude. But anyways, he introduced this term, or he just said it, and I'm crediting him to it, but he leads these experience trips occasionally, and he was talking about guided solitude. Like all of us need solitude, but left to our own devices in this own world of distraction and just a lot of content and information, our mind will go wherever it goes. It'll hop just from thing to thing to thing. Whereas if we try to take an intentional approach with guided solitude, where we're being pushed out, we have an objective, and going out on a trail in Ring the Springs, everybody has an objective, a different distance. It's going to be very taxing for them, but there is a clear start and there's a clear finish, and then they're coming back home. And in that interim space, when they're out there, it is technically guided. There is a path that they need to follow, and there would be people along the way to give them aid, but it is their effort, one foot in front of the other, that is going to get them home. And it's just like a fascinating thing for me. So like guided solitude, I was like, dang, that's really good. Like that's what we all need. And it takes a community approach, but we need to do it on our own. Like the work is self-propelled, if you will. I don't know.
Seems like
That
guided
might be
solitude.
another value.
It might be another value. Yeah.
Yeah.
Guided solitude also seems to be the practicing for the real thing. It's like we're doing this race, and it's more of a guided solitude because there is a path. But at some point in our lives, whether we choose it or whether it's chosen for us, we will be called to enter the woods at the darkest place where there is no path. And the more we practice this guided solitude, the more we go and run on a path that is set for us, even when it's difficult, the more prepared we will be when we arrive at that dark place in the woods and know that we must enter where there is no path. Thanks, Joseph Campbell.
You're welcome.
This is way off. We'll end with this. I've been playing around with ChatGPT along with hundreds of millions of other people.
Yeah.
And I asked so like the best way to do this is to prime ChatGPT. Like if you have a question you want to ask or a way you want to engage with it, ask 5 or 6 priming questions, the same you would if you were trying to get an answer out of a human, but you wanted the best answer from them. It's like, are you aware of this? Let's get some context, build a bunch of Venn diagrams, and then boom, shoot for the middle. And so I have been priming ChatGPT with specific people and their content, one being Joseph Campbell, and then saying, can you answer a question for me as if you were Joseph Campbell? And like, I feel like I've been having conversations with these people that are dead, but have produced great works. And I'm able to ask new questions based on like the world today and get answers from these people who are died and like their perspectives on it. It's super intriguing. I wouldn't put a lot of like weight in it being Joseph Campbell, but it's like,
I'm sorry, are you saying that you don't actually think it's Joseph Campbell's ghost talking to you? Is that what
Yeah.
you're clarifying that?
Yes, but I would clarify it and probably put a probability to it, which most people probably would not put a probability to it.
I'm sorry, you would put a probability to that, as in you are leaving open the possibility you are actually communicating with the ghost of Joseph Campbell.
I don't know that I would use the word ghost. I would just say Joseph Campbell.
So tell me, when you prime it to ask to answer questions as Tony Albrecht, is that would you put a probability to that it's actually Tony Albrecht answering those questions?
Currently, I would put a probability to that. I don't know enough about, I don't think we know enough about what's happening with this technology to not assign probabilities. I would put a very, very, very low probability, but it's all pretty, it's making me think differently about the universe in a weird, weird way.
It's kind of like Interstellar. You ever seen that movie?
Well, yes, I've seen. Yes. So you're saying that while I'm both here, I'm also trapped inside the Chat GPT.
No. Don't use like,
Heaven.
I wouldn't say you're
Screaming
trapped inside Chat GPT. I would just say while you're also here, you're also there, wherever there is. And I think like, what's the physics that like has this, the like something happens here and it also happens here, even though there's no attachment.
Quantum mechanics.
Thank you. So like,
Yeah, sure.
Quantum mechanics, quantum physics, there aren't answers for these types of things. So I'm not convinced that while we're here, we're not also there. We're way off tangent. And the words that I'm using for this aren't even accurate for how I feel about it. And there's no way that the probability on everything I'm saying is so low that if somebody were to listen to this and walk away thinking, Evan believes this, they would be wrong. I don't believe it, but I do think there's probabilities at play.
Well, I feel like you just gave me a different perspective. Like, I'm not discounting this or writing this off. It's a fascinating thought exercise.
I mean, so with AI, it's clear even the people who are building the things, the large language models, don't actually know exactly what's happening.
Right.
But they're predictive models. Like they are just like predicting.
I don't know that we're not predictive models.
We certainly are. But like the predictive model of me, the things that I'm shooting out now are brought out from the totality of all the things I've taken in. Whereas what ChatGPT, when you prompt it to give you something as Joseph Campbell, it is just it's taken in the internet, and then it's predicting what Joseph Campbell might say based on everything that's on the internet. But it's only going to get weirder. But it does feel magical. I mean, like it is mind-blowing what it can do instantaneously. Where, yeah, Evan, when we were messaging the other day, like we're both going down the rabbit hole in new ways. That's it. Yeah, we're not ready.
No,
as like collectively, we are not at all ready for this.
Which I think is one of the reasons why we're placing value on what we're doing. What were you going to say, Josh?
Well, yeah, I think that I was going the same route. I was watching something. There was this integration with HubSpot, and basically it was a chatbot that was plugged into a CRM, and so you could ask questions of it. And the dude that was given the demo, he was showing basically this process that typically occurs. right? If I want to find prospective organizations that I could work with, I would write down my criteria, I'd do research, I'd assemble a list, I'd start crafting a note to them. Whereas now you do an input to ChatGPT, AI does everything, and then you skip 6 steps. It's exactly the same thing that we've been talking about, in that like we are not ready to skip the steps yet because we haven't honored all the steps and understand the meaning and the value of the work that goes into each step. And so now we're just skipping 6, 7 steps to get to the end result. And it will do stuff to our mind. It will do stuff to say, okay, I'm going to put this in, somebody else is going to do the work, and now I can reap the benefits of it, which is just not how life works.
You're not going to run 100-miler with somebody else practicing running. That's for sure. It's like, this is the way, like putting one foot in front of the other, taking all of the steps for the 100 miles is still a way to do things. Like running is keeping me grounded as my mind flies into outer space thinking about these topics.
How many podcasts in the last like 2 months, 3 months have somehow got onto AI, like on random tangents? I feel like it's a high percentage.
At least
Very.
7, at least 7 podcasts.
Yeah.
I think I've listened to 15 to 20 hours of in-depth AI conversation in the last 3 weeks.
Me too. Yeah, I'm all over it. But it is going to be another change. I mean, Gary Vee keeps comparing it to the tractor. Like the way that, like before the tractor came along, like growing enough food was really hard to do. It required a tremendous amount of time and effort. And then the tractor comes along and it just upends, over the course of a few decades. We go from almost everybody lives on farms to 100 years later, it's like less than 10% of people live on farms. And now it's like 3% of Americans live on farms. Whereas that number was more like 85% in, 200 years ago. And like that, we're about to see the same thing happen largely in like all this stuff that the three of us work in.
Yeah.
Like to large degrees, in a way that's like we're going to get the stuff that we want so much easier. Like we're going to have to do so little of the lifting relative to what we have to do today. And so like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do then? When we get
this podcast, which we need to end because Josh has somewhere to go. So closing statements.
It's been nice seeing you, gentlemen.
Been very nice. The one thing I can't not say with what you just said, Tony, I know it's a double negative. Yeah. I have to say it. How about that? You said, everybody lived on farms or the tractor because we couldn't grow enough food. The one thing I have to call out is I feel like enough is a misnomer.
Those are it stood out to me too.
Yeah. Like I think we've always been able to grow enough. It's just that we've always wanted to grow more. And anyways, I feel like I couldn't get off without saying that.
I mean, famine was a real thing. Like starving. Like it's really hard for us to starve in the developed world in 2023. It was not hard to starve to death 100 years ago, even 100 and like 200 years ago. Like that was a real thing, right? And so like that's
to say it's not a real thing still today. Like there's still people starving to death.
It's gone down quite a bit. Like I could moderate the middle of. I feel smack in the middle of both of these thoughts because this is another podcast.
Like people put in all the time and effort to growing food because it was really hard to do. It was really unpredictable. And like you had to figure out how to make enough food during the growing season that you could then put away for the rest of the year so that you could all survive through the winter to get to the next growing season, right? And
there's even like that though. But there was a time before that where it was more hunting gathering though.
And that's where I want to get back to. I want to get back to 10,000 years ago, and let's just come forward from 10,000 years ago
yeah,
to
so the
now.
starvation started from thinking we could even control and garden and farm in the first place. Hunting
With the agricultural revolution, which happened about 8,000 years ago. And
Yeah.
so let's
the
go
tractors
back.
were just the solution to the problem that was created by the agricultural revolution. Oh man, we got so far off track. Thank you for listening. If you've listened this far to the Unrationed podcast,
you're a
check
true
us out on
supporter.
YouTube. You are a true supporter. And we would like for you to join us for Wild 32 coming up. Go to the website, enter your email address if you'd like to know when the next one's going to be, or just subscribe to this podcast. Keep listening, and we'll do an announcement when we are about to launch the next Wild 32. If you want to join us on a long run at some point, also enter your email address because we're going to be doing some more of these. All right. Thanks for listening.